People often say passion fades with age, that love softens into comfort and routine. I used to believe that, until the night my past appeared in a blue-lit message on my phone. "Mrs. Clark, do you remember me?" it read. "You once told me that words could change a life. You were right." The message came from Daniel Ross, a name that echoed faintly through my memory, like a half-forgotten melody. He had been one of my students nearly half a century ago, all wild curiosity and unpolished charm. Now, the boy I once taught had become a man, reaching back through time to touch a life that had long ago gone quiet. At 74, I had mastered silence. My husband, Harold, and I had built a life on it, decades of polite conversation, synchronized routines, and the soft hum of cohabitation. We had been partners in every practical sense, sharing a mortgage, children, and the comforting illusion of stability. Yet behind the tidy smiles and practiced gestures lay a truth I dared not speak: we hadn't really seen each other in years. When Harold retired, I imagined it would bring us closer. Instead, it magnified the distance. He filled his days pruning the garden and watching the evening news, while I drifted from room to room, tidying spaces already clean. There were moments when I'd catch my reflection in the window, silver hair, soft eyes, still searching, and wonder whether anyone would ever look at me the way he once did, or if that kind of gaze was reserved for youth. Daniel's message changed everything. It wasn't the words themselves, but what they represented, a reminder that I had once mattered beyond my roles as wife and mother. I replied hesitantly, a single line that felt both harmless and dangerous: "Of course I remember you, Daniel. How lovely to hear from you after all these years." Our exchange began innocently enough. He spoke of art, of life after divorce, of how he'd found my old advice still echoing in his choices. I responded with stories from my quieter existence, careful not to reveal the loneliness pulsing beneath each sentence. But with every message, something stirred, a pulse I hadn't felt in years, as though my heart were rediscovering rhythm. One night, as Harold snored softly beside me, Daniel sent another message: "You always said the world was full of hidden fires. Do you still believe that?" I stared at the words for a long time, the question flickering across my mind like a match held to paper. Then, with trembling fingers, I typed back. I thought mine had gone out, but maybe not. When I pressed send, the quiet in my room changed, no longer peaceful, but alive with something forbidden and electric. And just like that, I realized the fire I buried decades ago wasn't gone at all. It had only been waiting for one message, one memory, one moment to burn again. For most of my life, I believed love was about endurance. You stayed, you forgave, you adapted, not because you were happy, but because you made a promise. Harold and I had lived that promise for 52 years. Our love had long ago settled into something mild and domestic, like tea left too long to cool. In the mornings, he tended to his roses while I watched from the kitchen window. He hummed old tunes under his breath, content in his solitude. We spoke in brief exchanges, reminders about pills, groceries, and doctor appointments, but the warmth that once animated our words had faded to habit. I sometimes tried to reignite it, asking about old memories, about the places we'd once dreamed of visiting. His answers were always short, polite, distracted. The man who had once written me love letters now fell asleep mid-conversation. Still, I couldn't resent him. Harold had given me safety, loyalty, and a roof that never leaked. But he'd stopped giving me himself, and I'd stopped asking. The quiet between us had grown into something sacred and terrifying. Then Daniel appeared again in my life, and with him came noise, laughter, curiosity, chaos. He wrote with a kind of raw openness that unsettled me. "Do you ever feel like you disappeared into your own life?" he asked one evening. I hesitated before replying, my fingers hovering over the keys. "Yes," I finally wrote. "Every day." He told me about his gallery by the coast, about the colors he used to paint the feeling of time slipping away. "It's strange," he said. "When I was young, I wanted to capture beauty. Now, I just want to remember it." Something about his honesty disarmed me. Our exchanges grew longer, our tone softer. I began waiting for his messages the way I once waited for Harold's footsteps when we were newly married. That realization both thrilled and frightened me. One afternoon, I found an old photo of myself, 24, wearing a yellow sundress, laughing into the wind. I stared at it for a long time. I still recognized the woman, but she felt like someone I'd misplaced. I wanted to find her again, even if it meant stepping into danger. When Daniel invited me to his gallery opening in Devon, I didn't answer right away. I told myself it was madness, a retired schoolteacher traveling miles to meet a man who belonged to her past. But every reason to stay home sounded like another excuse to keep fading. That night, as Harold snored softly beside me, I whispered into the dark, just one trip. Just one reminder that I'm still alive. And though no one could hear me, I knew something had already changed. The quiet between us had broken, and there was no turning it back into silence. The day I saw Daniel again, the world seemed intent on reminding me that time had passed. The train windows reflected a face I barely recognized, silver hair pulled into a neat twist, fine lines around eyes that once drew attention. Yet beneath the years, something restless stirred, like a secret eager to be discovered. When I stepped into his gallery, the scent of oil paint and cedar filled the air. Sunlight spilled across canvases that seemed to breathe, faces half-formed, colors caught between shadow and flame. And then there he was, standing by a window, his smile both familiar and changed. "Mrs. Clark," he said, his voice soft but warm. "Evelyn," I corrected, surprised by my own boldness. "It's been a very long time." He studied me with a quiet intensity that made me feel exposed, seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. "You haven't changed," he said. "You still have that same spark in your eyes." I laughed, deflecting. "At 74, sparks tend to fizzle out." "Not yours," he murmured. We spent the afternoon walking through the gallery. Each painting told fragments of his life, a broken marriage, lost ambitions, the ache of solitude. When he spoke, I heard not just the man he'd become but echoes of the boy who once believed words could change the world. We shared coffee afterward at a small cafe overlooking the sea. The waves crashed below, steady and endless, like the rhythm of something ancient. Conversation flowed easily, weaving between art and memory, laughter and confession. I told him about my quiet life, about Harold's distance, about how routine had become a kind of slow erasure. "You make it sound like you disappeared," he said. "Maybe I did," I replied, tracing the rim of my cup. "Maybe I stayed still so long I forgot I was moving." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine, a simple touch, but it sent a pulse through me, sharp and undeniable. For a heartbeat, I forgot the years, the vows, the boundaries that once defined me. When I returned to my hotel that night, I couldn't sleep. The air felt charged, the echo of his voice looping through my thoughts. I kept asking myself what it meant, this sudden aliveness, this quiet betrayal of everything I'd built. By dawn, I understood what frightened me most. It wasn't Daniel's attention, nor the risk of discovery. It was the realization that I no longer wanted to be the woman who never took a chance. As the first light crept across the horizon, I whispered to my reflection, "You've woken something you can't put back to sleep." And deep down, I knew I wouldn't even try. It happened on a Thursday, unremarkable, like most of the days that had built my quiet life. I came home from Devon with the sea salt still clinging to my coat, the echo of Daniel's laughter chasing me like a guilty ghost. The house smelled of Harold's cooking, stew and thyme, but the air carried a heaviness I couldn't name. He was waiting at the kitchen table, hands clasped, eyes tired but steady. A single sheet of paper lay between us, printed messages, my words and Daniel's replies, stripped of warmth and turned into evidence. "Evelyn," he said, his voice measured, too calm. "Would you like to explain this?" I stared at the page, at my own sentences, so intimate, so alive. The room blurred. "Where did you find them?" I whispered. "You left your email open," he replied simply. "I wasn't looking for this. I just stumbled into it." Silence settled between us, thick and trembling. For years, silence had been our comfort. But this silence, this one, burned. He leaned back, eyes glinting with something sharp. "Do you love him?" I shook my head quickly. "No. It wasn't love, not in the way you think." "Then what was it?" he asked, his voice cracking on the final word. I tried to answer, but language failed me. How could I explain that Daniel hadn't been a replacement, only a reflection of the woman I used to be? He made me remember myself, I said finally. He reminded me that I'm still here. Harold's gaze softened, just for a moment. And I didn't? The question broke something inside me. You stopped trying, I said quietly. And I stopped asking you to. He turned away, his shoulders sinking under invisible weight. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, the wind rattled the garden gate. For the first time in decades, there were no rehearsed words left to hide behind. Finally, he whispered, I thought this was enough. Maybe that was my mistake. He stood, his movements deliberate, as if afraid the room itself might collapse. I don't hate you, Evelyn, he said, his tone weary but sincere. But I can't sit here pretending anymore. We've both been living half a life. And just like that, the quiet that had once defined our marriage fractured completely. When he left the room, I didn't stop him. I sat alone at the table, staring at the printed words between my trembling hands. Each one carried the warmth I'd chased, and the wreckage I'd caused. The clock chimed. Somewhere, dinner burned on the stove. But I didn't move. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the silence. I was listening to it, and realizing it was finally honest. Weeks passed in a kind of suspended stillness after Harold left. The house, once filled with the rhythm of his footsteps and the hum of daily habit, now echoed only my own movements, the clink of a teacup, the rustle of paper, the faint creak of floorboards. For a time, I mistook the quiet for loneliness. But gradually, I realized it was something else entirely, space. I spent my mornings walking along the cliff path overlooking the sea, the same one Daniel had once described in his letters. The air there was sharp and forgiving, the wind unafraid to touch me. I found comfort in its honesty, its refusal to pretend. I thought of Daniel sometimes, of what we'd shared, but I didn't reach out. The part of me that had sought him no longer needed him. What I'd been searching for had never been in his arms, it had been sleeping somewhere inside my own chest, waiting to be claimed. Harold and I spoke again, eventually. Over coffee at our daughter's home, he looked older, softer. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a kind of weary acceptance. You seem lighter, he said, almost as if it were a kindness. I think I am, I replied. Maybe we both are. He nodded. I wasn't angry, you know. Just sad that I didn't see you fading. I smiled faintly. We both went blind at the same time. We didn't discuss reconciliation, there was no need. Some loves survive separation, but others find peace only in distance. What mattered was that we'd both stepped back into truth. At home that night, I opened my old laptop and found one unread email from Daniel. The subject line read simply, "The fire still burns." I hovered over it for a long moment, then closed the computer without opening it. I didn't need to. I already knew. That evening, as dusk folded over the sea, I lit a single candle on the windowsill. Its flame flickered against the glass, small but steady. I watched it dance, realizing that passion wasn't something meant to be possessed, it was meant to remind you that you're still alive. People think infidelity is only about betrayal. But for me, it was a mirror, a reflection of everything I had forgotten to love about myself. I don't excuse it, I simply understand it now. At 74, I've stopped apologizing for being alive. The world still hums with possibilities, and my heart, fragile, flawed, forgiving, still knows how to burn. Outside, the tide rolled in and out, endless and certain. I whispered into the dark, not to Harold, not to Daniel, but to the woman I had finally reclaimed. You are still here. And that is enough.